It's all about social interaction. It's about content creation empowered inside the game experience.
It just felt something natural, like it was impressive, is all I can say. I mean, it was the first time trying something like this, and I knew that Sony nailed it from the first time I actually played it. It just grabbed me from the very first instance.
It's about community, it's about collaboration, it's about customization, it's about emergent entertainment powered by the audience at the center of the entertainment experience.
It was the first alternate reality game on console, the first alternate reality game in a virtual world. The main space got over 4 million visits in 3 months, and that was just one of the 12 spaces we created.
My favorite thing to do was just kind of stare out at the ocean and the boats in your studio apartment.
After I started playing it, I played it pretty much every single day.
You simply quit from the game and it will take you straight back into home where you left off.
Your life, your network, your home. Only on PlayStation 3.
Good. Surveillance are on the other side, SO-19 already in there.
The coup was posted.
Team in position and ready. Well, get in there then!
This was the original premise of PlayStation Home, or rather, this is where PlayStation Home came from. A PS2 title out of Sony's London studio, a very prominent game back in the PS2 days, The Getaway Black Monday. This was the sequel to the 2002 Getaway title, and it was supposed to have an online mode where players could meet up in a pub setting and decide on what heist they wanted to go on together. Ultimately, this part of the game was removed, but the idea lived on, largely because of one man, Phil Harrison, who at the time was the vice president of Sony Computer Entertainment Europe. Phil looked at the foundation of what was built and had a greater vision for what the Getaway was going for. He envisioned this hub world where players could do this with not just one game, but many. He pictured this space between games, a lobby system for any title. Be it racing, first-person shooter, action-adventure, this would be the place where gamers could meet up, decide on their game plan, and jump right into their titles, with a focus on getting many people into the space for a natural setting of communication. It was codenamed The Hub. But this was all taking place in 2004 to 2005, a time where many of Sony's decisions and funding were still at the mercy of corporate approval from the headquarters in Japan. And culturally, the hub didn't make much sense to Japan. A lot of the higher executives within Sony didn't totally understand what the hub was and why people would want to use it. It was still seen that multiplayer and social interaction was done locally, within the same room, actually being present with your friends. So the hub was a tough sell for Sony Japan. But Phil Harrison championed the project. He pushed hard to get it through, and was able to secure funding for the idea in order to bring it past the concept stage and into full production on the upcoming and unannounced PlayStation 3. Early on, Home looked much different. It was going for a PlayStation 2.5 style, where the avatars were more cartoonish looking. A former Home developer said they were more in line with what Nintendo was doing with the Miis on the Wii, where you had larger hands, feet, and a friendly face, resembling more of a comic book-like style. This didn't pan out once Sony's creative direction group saw the work. They were an independent entity Sony used to QA their upcoming initiatives and products, and they felt as though the presentation of the characters wasn't selling the PS3. While this may seem puzzling, the PS3 went on to have a very purposeful marketing campaign about how powerful the platform was, how beautiful the games were, how Blu-rays could store so much data, how the cell processor was pushing boundaries in games. Cartoon avatars weren't going to fit, and so the team spent a lot of time completely reworking the project to have the characters look more realistic. This extended into environments as well. Things like pets, emotes, crazy lighting, oddball spaces were to be scrapped so it looked more natural. And while this path may seem defined now that the general idea is realism, it had a very rocky development cycle, namely because many producers just had too many different visions. Conflicting ideas seemed to be the norm when it came to Home's early development. and even worse was the rotating chair of producers who sometimes just weren't completely sure how to even approach the project. Home's only silver lining was Phil Harrison. On the outside, PS3 officially launches in 2006 to lukewarm fanfare. The console receives heavy criticism for its lack of games and features compared to Microsoft's Xbox 360, but it didn't take very long into the PS3 lifecycle for rumors and speculation surrounding Sony's plans for updating the PS3. Before the system even launched, it was being discussed that Sony was going to add entitlements to the user interface, this mimicking what achievements are on Xbox 360. There were also murmurings about an avatar system coming as well, being referenced to Nintendo's Mii's. The general consensus amongst fans and critics is that Sony had something up their sleeves. They had to have something that answers both Microsoft and Nintendo. It's just a matter of what is it and what does it look like. More importantly, when would it come? That answer didn't take very long. Early 2007 is when PlayStation Home had a not-so-secretive reveal, as many websites were now reporting that the name was in fact PlayStation Home, and that we would learn more about it during a public reveal in March at GDC 2007. Sure enough, the rumors were right on the money.
Now the era that we're moving into is Game 3.0. This is all about the connected device. So what we'd like to do now is to share with you some of our ideas for how this will come to life in consumers' hands. The first thing I would like to share with you is not a product, but is a service, and it's a service called Home.
Phil Harrison begins the world's first look and public demo of PlayStation Home, being pegged as Game 3.0. This is the vision being put into full effect. A digital world that looks familiar but lavish. A human character that can be customized and shaped to look just like you, dress like you, even gesture and behave just like you. The world is full of other real players just interacting and socializing. You can walk around and see that the world includes ads and posters just as you'd see in real life. Proximity sound is utilized to give the sense of presence and familiarity when approaching TVs. You can text or voice chat with anyone you like. You can walk into different spaces and see that Home is much more than a social network. It's an interactive network. There's pool tables, arcade machines, and bowling, but more importantly, there's private spaces. Every user gets their own studio apartment where they can invite friends. It's fully customizable, using real physics to move and place your furniture. You can set picture frames or play music, and you can pull those files right from the hard drive to display or listen to whatever you want. This is a full digital lifestyle that can easily resemble your own, or one that you wish you could live. But the vision for games is not lost. The presentation also shows off a trophy room where you can display all the accomplishments you've earned in your games. You can pick and choose what can be displayed so other players can admire what you've done. This entire event, however, despite being the first real look at Home, is really for developers, with Harrison keen to point out every so often the true potential of the service, that it's free for players so that developers can go in and provide new content that can be purchased, new furniture, new clothes, premium apartments, and so on. A concept which back then was quite foreign. Free-to-play models weren't commonplace in the industry, especially at such a massive scale. There was also a big focus on partnerships, noting that additional spaces can be added for upcoming releases, or that certain videos and posters could display ads just as they do in real life. This wasn't just a reveal event. This was a sales pitch, because internally, the struggle for justifying Home was a point of contention. It was already an uphill battle to fund the project, but now that it was here, what was it supposed to do? Sony created a new job, Regional Business Manager of PlayStation Home, and Daniel Hill took that role. At the time, he said, everyone thought it was a bit like Second Life. That was the easiest comparison to make, but it wasn't given a reason to exist commercially. It didn't have any marketing budget behind it. It didn't have any commercial structure behind it, which was part of the reason I was brought on board, certainly in Europe anyway, to try and give it a reason for being. No one knew what to do with it, but the business finally realized it had better start trying to recoup some of the investment that they made, which was sizable. After GDC, the overall enthusiasm for Home was high. Nothing like this has been done before on game consoles. It far exceeds what Second Life was doing on PC, and PlayStation fans were thrilled to see such an impressive service was coming that would easily blow the competition out of the water. Now, all they had to do was wait. PlayStation Home was slated to release October 2007. But before then, we would see more of the service at E3. There we see Sony playfully use Home to open the show and discuss related products until Phil Harrison begins another presentation. This time showcasing mobile phone support and a supplementary website that acts as a social network. He then demonstrates the very original idea of PlayStation Home, which is to launch games directly from the service. Doing so with MotorStorm, they skip the game startup animations and main menu and go directly into a lobby. Phil says this will be supported with every game. Ending out the demonstration, it's promised to be on track for a fall release. But that didn't happen. Home missed its targeted launch. And then, February 2008, Phil Harrison resigns from Sony, Home's #1 fan. The man greatly responsible for actually getting it off the ground has left. He left before it even got a public release, and internally, the team was worried. Many of Home's developers felt like the whole thing could be thrown out without a moment's notice. However, development pressed forward, albeit the air was much different with Phil gone. No one was really carrying the service forward until Oscar Clark was brought in, with his official job title being Home Architect. Reflecting back, Clark said, "They were going for launch, and basically they didn't have a product, as far as I was concerned. There were some fundamental pieces that just didn't work as an idea." After numerous invites going out to a very minor select crowd of gamers in a private beta, Home finally reaches a public release December 2008, over a year past the targeted launch. At this point, many gamers were already fed up with the multiple delays, but actually getting in was perhaps more disappointing. There was no trophy room, no media sharing, and game launching had to be implemented by developers. These issues were minor though, when traversing Home was the biggest obstacle. Downloading a new space was slow and buggy, most rooms were full, and by the time you were in, there was poor performance. All of this due to Home going for a more grounded, realistic look. In early testing, the cartoon models presented rooms capable of up to 200 players. The open beta resulted in about 50 people per room with a low frame rate. Worst of all, much like Home's internal conflicts, there was no sense of purpose. It seemed as though almost everyone's initial impressions of Home was that it was boring and there was simply nothing to do. Why stick around when there's nothing but technical issues and limitations? Many people asked these questions and never returned. However, there was still a very large group of users who ignored or simply didn't mind these issues. It may have been a slow burn, but gradually, even from the early onset, PlayStation Home found its audience, and they didn't just like it, they loved it. I reached out to many hardcore Home users from back then and spoke with a number of different people, but got to talk more closely with 3 individuals, and they shared their experiences with me, and they told me what mattered most to them about Home.
We walked around that area and just talked to people for a half hour before we even did anything else. After that, I was hooked. I wanted more of it. I was like, wow, this is a great way to meet some people, have some fun, maybe do a couple things here and there. Like, I'd play it on a regular basis. It was just constant.
Home had a lot of different maps, it was just different. Every space was different. Every time you load into a server, it's different people. It's just new all the time. I have a lot of social anxiety. Not really a lot of friends in real life, so to make friends online and be able to text chat. So yeah, it definitely made it a lot easier.
This was an indicator that this was really a good platform and people really enjoyed it. PS3 was wholly used because of Home. And the best part of the Home is the interface. So you could just launch the games together with the other guys immediately while using Home. So it was great. It wasn't gradual, it was just instant.
It was abundantly clear that social interaction and community was key. One of the bigger tipping points for the overall direction of Home really took place in 2009 with the launch of Z, an alternate reality game that took place in Home in real time over a 12-week period. It was a mystery game where users had to find Jess and the true meaning of Z by looking for hidden fragments and butterflies that would constantly change in Home. There was a main hub space where users could gather to exchange ideas and figure out how to progress the story, which was vital because there were many minigames, but also websites, video footage, pictures, billboards, secret codes, puzzles, all needed to piece together the story to find out what Z is. It was an experience that many people found exhilarating. It brought everyone together, and it felt like there was a real sense of community. This was also a big deal for the developer N-Dreams, whom not only made Z, but went on to be one of the biggest content providers for PlayStation Home.
It's a really different experience where you're relying on other people and you're playing the game together, but not in a sort of 2-player, 4-player thing like a lot of console games. You're playing together with 600,000 other players all at the same time.
By TGS 2009, Sony's Kaz Hirai announced that Home had been downloaded 8 million times, and while it wasn't exactly clear how many were actively using Home, it appeared like the service would be sticking around, even though Sony would go on to mention the service less and less as they spent most of their efforts on PSP and PS3 as gaming machines. This is where PlayStation Home seemingly falls into obscurity, yet in actuality, it was becoming something entirely different. While the social aspect was one of many pieces in the original vision, it pretty much eclipsed everything else. Almost fittingly, considering much of Home's development was facing an identity crisis. It was supposed to be for gamers to talk, launch games, but also there were game partnerships, trophy rooms, games built within Home, and while some of these things were there, by and large, Home was all about the talking. Many big game publishers were reluctant to make spaces because they simply didn't see the value in it when they could just advertise their games on TV or the web where there's more exposure. They also felt it wasn't worth their development resources when most studios were in full swing with their titles. This is why we never got the trophy room. Developers just didn't want to be bothered with it. The games in Home never really seemed to catch on, Z being the most successful because it was inherently based on the concept of interacting with others. Everything else just didn't pan out. Sodium was an MMO for Home, which was meant to have 4 parts but ended with only 2. The Midway was a series of carnival games in space. Mercia was an RPG that didn't seem to drum up much interest. There were games, but they just weren't good. This grand vision of Home as a place for games and to launch games with big game partnerships just did not happen. What did happen were partnerships with brands, companies that advertise products not in the games industry. Red Bull, for example, understood completely what the service was and how it could be leveraged, and so they signed a multi-million-dollar deal for content and advertising in PlayStation Home. And this wouldn't be the only time something like this happened. Sony was able to work out a few brand deals, all of which were reported to be long-term contracts worth millions. So while Sony was working out what made sense for Home when it came to revenue, independent developers were doing the same. When they learned games weren't working, they realized selling clothes, furniture, and apartments were. This idea of microtransaction content back then was still a very early concept, almost weird. Many thought it would be ridiculous to pay $3, $4, even $5 for a digital item that was considered additive. Even the developers were skeptical. However, the demand was there, and it soon became one of the biggest driving forces in Home's revenue.
I spent $250 on Home, way more than I should have ever spent on Home. Other people that I had seen, that I had talked to, they would buy everything as soon as it came out. As soon as it hit the store inside the mall, they would be there on the day that it released to buy it and walk around with it on.
I knew a guy, unfortunately. He spent over 3,000. 3,000. I'm like, are you serious? He's like, yeah, actually more than that, but I'm pretty sure it's 3,000 at least.
PlayStation Home's director at the time, Peter Edward, said Home was seeing users that often spent far more money than what you'd see on Facebook or even mobile today. Selling these virtual items became extremely lucrative for the third-party developers that finally understood how to best capitalize in Home. This is why N-Dreams, the studio behind Z, went on to be the biggest content creator for the service. The CEO, Patrick O'Looney, claims they were making over 7 figures annually from Home. And while it was reportedly a pain to actually make the items and get them imported into the service, once they were there, they were profitable almost immediately. Another Home director back in 2010, Jack Buser, says, "We haven't talked too much about the platform itself, but what we have said is that every mature virtual item we have ever created has been profitable. We've released over 5,000 virtual items on the platform, and we know that once those items reach maturity, they are profitable. So you see us creating a tremendous amount of virtual items because it is such a high margin business for us to be in. I would say that it is a very good business model for PlayStation."
Maybe like $500, But it's just like Fortnite, you know, nobody wants to be running around looking like a default. So you've got like your own space. Like there's Harbor Studios, and then there was like the playground apartment, the yacht, stuff like that. Kind of like bragging in a way.
This is how home was evolving. It was this community of people who enjoyed socializing and creating a lifestyle around it, some of whom would take it to an extreme. It seems status and notoriety were a big part of using home regularly. The superficiality of it and making sure you were wearing and sporting the very best. This is how the service not only started having an incredible cash flow, but also bringing out some of the darker parts of the community.
So there was me and my friends, and then there was like the cool girl that was really rude to everybody and her boyfriend. I remember one time I met these two dudes, and I was trying to learn how to do a glitch, and they were being like really rude. It turned into like a giant thing, and they both reported me, and my PlayStation Network account got banned.
So was it a lot of harassment?
Yeah. But, you know, what can you do, really?
The least that I liked was kind of community, and that was towards the end of home. I mean, it was getting more toxic, you know what I'm saying? Like, all these spams, you know, just finding your IP addresses and all that. I mean, it was just kind of, it was a complex question, which is why I think community was bad. It was really bad. Towards the end, of course. I was seeing the same person. Like, I just logged on in the morning, I see the same person standing in the same place. At night, I just come to the same place, and I see the same person standing in the same place, talking to many fellows. And there were many people that joined him. So it's like people were like, I don't know, posts sitting there. Didn't move, they were just talking. These people that would shit talk to others, you know, like the bad guys. In Home Square, you would meet the casual players, you know, the players themselves. Not the people that live in home, but the players that just use it to communicate.
2011, 2012, that's when we started seeing people buying PS3s exclusively to play PlayStation Home. And the more people played the game, the more they wanted to hop on just home. They didn't want to buy anything else. So they would take all their money and sink it into their account and then buy all kinds of pets and clothing items and apartments and all kinds of other crazy things. It seems like a lot of people took more time out of their day to use home than they would use anything else. I'm not exactly sure what happened there.
It's no surprise, really. Any online environment is bound to create this kind of behavior. But with home, a place where your persona can be visualized, where the world looks and appears just like the real one, it's amplified. There's more purpose to be someone, to be noticed, to be liked, to be loved. This is how PlayStation Home transformed. For better or worse, Sony's original vision didn't pan out, but instead flourished into a community of hardcore, loyal users who didn't buy games but instead bought virtual items. Instead of closing Home early, Sony saw the revenue and decided Home can stick around and be what it became: multi-million-dollar brand deals and profitable digital goods. And it's not like Home was completely ignored by Sony. There was a reason why it never officially left beta. It was always changing. June 2010 saw the first global public space where users from any region could meet up. There was also the E3 2010 booth, which offered previews and interviews of upcoming games. Sony offered a fair amount of integration and support when it came to first-party titles, since third parties didn't do much. Spaces like Central Plaza saw many tweaks and redesigns. A lot of things were added and removed over time. The Home team were always doing what they could and listening to the community for feedback. Sony still made great efforts to support games within Home and try to convey it as a place for gamers, and over time you can see them loosen up the idea of being stoic and grounded, allowing more crazy add-ons from the early development. Spaces became a lot more creative, bizarre costumes and pets were in there now. It actually looked incredibly different compared to its original public release back in 2008. But come 2013, the PlayStation 4 was on the horizon, and Home's relevancy was put into question, or rather, its longevity. A sequel to Home, a native PS4 version, or even rumors were nowhere to be seen. Unsurprisingly, the focus for PS4 was much different than that of the PS3's. Sony was aiming at hardcore gamers and only hardcore gamers, and with no one internally this time around to make a case for why Home mattered, it seemed all but obvious of its fate. In August of 2014, Sony Computer Entertainment Japan announced September would be the final month for users to purchase content, and that the service would close March 2015. And once September came, SCEA and SCEE also confirmed March 31st, 2015 would be the final day of PlayStation Home.
PlayStation Home was where I met so many of my friends at, and we actually talked back and forth today. Like, I know quite a few of them personally now. I'm planning a trip to England to go see a couple of them. I really enjoyed myself. I did. But if the Vita has taught me anything, it's that Sony just doesn't care anymore. They're all worried about the bottom line, how much money they can make off everything. And with that in mind, all you have to do is look at the microtransaction history of Home and look how much people spent.
I miss the people, I have good memories of the people that I used to hang out with. I mean, they're gone. Most of them are gone. Some of them got banned for some reason. Some of them lost their accounts. Perhaps the closure of PlayStation Home actually served as a disinterest. They're like, I don't want to play this anymore. Why do I need this? I met a lot of people like that. And the fact is that most of the people would say that you are like over 20 years old and something. Most of them were like teenagers. As teenagers, you grow up, you progress, and you're like, maybe you should just drop this, Play games, but not in the home. You just can't spend all the hours there anymore. Hold it in the memories. There's nothing that can be done about it. It's gone for sure.
The ending to Home was bittersweet for many. Some felt it was appropriate as they grew out of the service, getting ready to go to college or finding a job, or just not having the time anymore, while others wish it didn't leave. They enjoyed this feeling of belonging to something, or the service's ability to help people cope with anxiety. For one reason or another, all walks of life enjoyed Home, and it was going to be missed.
Yeah, I think there's a future in it. I do. It's a way for people to meet up and make new friends, do things out of the ordinary. I really hope in the future we have something like that.
I was really upset when they took it away. And I know that when they were ending it, a bunch of people would get on Home, stay together until the end, the very end. And I remember being upset because I missed it and everything. But it was amazing, and it's a really great time,
The third-party developers of Home who found their success either went on to create Home alternatives or do something different altogether. Some people went on to use those other services, but it seems many dropped out. The accessibility of Home on PS3 is part of what made it so easy. Sony claims over 41 million people downloaded Home and used the service at least once, but there's no actual figure on active users. What they did say is those who used it stayed on for a long time, most sessions averaging close to an hour per user. And even though many developers openly discussed their success, Sony was keen to never actually reveal what they made from Home, and more importantly, if it broke even. Home director Peter Edwards states, "Home is profitable, but over the lifetime of Home, that's a different story, because obviously Home has been going for a very long time and the cost of setting it up in the first place was pretty high. So the profit and loss looks very different now to what it did back in the early days when our focus was on producing something cool and not necessarily getting revenue from it. And also we were still learning the ropes as far as running the platform is concerned and producing the SDK. For something that almost didn't happen, it became life-changing to so many people. But the clear lack of identity early on is what kept Home from reaching its full potential. By the time the community decided what Home is, Sony had already spent millions in all the wrong areas. In hindsight, Home was ahead of its time. It rode the early wave of microtransactions and online social networking. Had the focus been that from the start, it might look entirely different. Or if Phil Harrison stayed at Sony to fully flesh out his ideas with big funding and genuine interest. On the outside, Home came and went and was seen as a total failure that nobody missed. But for anyone involved, whether it was Sony, the developers, or the community, PlayStation Home meant something. And depending on who you talk to, the story will always be different. Thank you so much for watching and making it to the end. I want to thank Adam, Lucy, and Latif for speaking with me and sharing their stories, and everybody else that I reached out to on PSN and Twitter, but also the home community at large. This would not have been possible without all that great archive footage on YouTube. Pretty instrumental in doing a project like this, so I did try to credit everybody appropriately. But, you know, for me personally, when it came to home, I was part of the private beta in mid-2008. I was in one of the very early wave of invites, and I was impressed, but at the same time, it just didn't grab me. And over the years, I would always check in 4 or 5 months. I was there for most redesigns, and I'd be in there for 30 minutes to an hour, but it just didn't hook me like it did other people. And I keep thinking in the back of my head, you know, if Sony did it right, if they didn't try to make it what it wasn't, if they had the right people attached to the project from the get-go, I think it would have been much different. It's just unfortunate that we'll never really be able to tell that story. But anyway, here comes the plea for help. Any support on Patreon.com is greatly appreciated for very long projects like these, especially such a niche topic. I don't know what YouTube's going to do with this one, or even just watching all the ads. You know, anything helps, whether it's $1 a month watching the ads, like, share, comment, you know, send it to some friends. You know the whole deal. Anything really helps and goes a long way, so I'd really appreciate it. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube, and you can follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan. That is pretty much it, and I will see you all in my next video game documentary. You take it easy.